Hi ladies, welcome back. Gloves, a seemingly simple accessory, yet throughout history, they've held far more significance than we might first assume. From their early beginnings in ancient civilizations to their iconic status in high society, gloves were more than just a fashion choice. They were a symbol of elegance, femininity, and social standing. But what is it about these delicate coverings that made them so essential to a woman's wardrobe? Why did women wear gloves, and what did they truly represent? In today's video, we'll explore the fascinating history of women's gloves, uncovering how they were not only a mark of refinement, but also a tool to navigate society's complex codes of behavior. From aristocratic ballrooms to the streets of Paris, gloves have played a key role in defining both the personal and public lives of women for centuries. The story of gloves begins long before they became a staple in a woman's wardrobe. The origins of gloves can be traced back to ancient civilizations, where they first emerged not as a fashion statement, but for practical reasons. In ancient Egypt, gloves were used as a protective tool, primarily worn by workers, priests, and royalty. The elite used them to protect their hands from the harsh elements of daily life, but also as a way to signify their status. In fact, ancient Egyptians adorned their gloves with intricate designs, made from leather, linen, or animal hides, showcasing their wealth and social standing. Moving forward in history, the Greeks and Romans continued the practical use of gloves, especially in athletic competitions and warfare. Roman soldiers, for example, wore gloves as part of their armor, protecting their hands during battle. Meanwhile, in Greek culture, gloves were seen as a sign of ritualistic purity, often worn during ceremonies and religious activities. It was in these early times that gloves began to take on the dual role of both utility and symbolism. But it wasn't until the Middle Ages in Europe that gloves truly began to evolve into the social accessory we recognize today. During this period, gloves became much more than a mere protective item. They became a symbol of honor, virtue, and nobility. Wealthy nobles and knights wore elaborately designed gloves as part of their formal attire, often crafted from luxurious materials such as silk and velvet. These gloves were decorated with embroidery, jewels, and fur, signifying not only wealth but also refinement and social distinction. By the 15th century, gloves were being used as a form of diplomatic gift. Exchanging gloves between monarchs and royalty symbolized alliances and respect. It was a gesture of goodwill, a tactile bond between people of power. In this way, gloves were not just functional. They became a language in themselves, signaling respect and alliance without the need for words. As we entered the 16th century, gloves truly became an important part of women's attire. They were worn daily, not just for protection, but as an essential accessory to complete any respectable outfit. This marked the beginning of gloves as a symbol of refinement, marking a transition from mere protection to a marker of a woman's status and femininity. By the 18th and 19th centuries, gloves had firmly established themselves as more than just practical or protective items. They had become deeply embedded in the social fabric, symbolizing status, femininity, and societal expectations. During this period, gloves were not only a key part of daily attire, but also an integral part of one's identity, especially for women. In the 18th century, gloves were predominantly worn by the aristocracy and the wealthy elite, particularly in Europe. Made from luxurious materials like silk, lace, and satin, they were an immediate indicator of one's social standing. The richer the fabric, the higher the status. Gloves were not just worn, they were a mark of privilege. For women, this was particularly important, as gloves became a status symbol tied to their wealth, their class, and ultimately, their role within society. More than just an accessory, gloves also played a role in the strict codes of etiquette that governed high society. In the 18th century, particularly in England and France, formal gloves were expected attire for social gatherings, from balls to dinners. A woman would rarely appear in public without gloves on, as they signified both respectability and modesty. Women were expected to wear gloves to cover their hands, which were considered intimate and private, much like the rest of the body. A woman who did not wear gloves was often seen as improper or lacking in refinement. As society moved into the 19th century, gloves became even more symbolically charged. The glove became emblematic of a woman's femininity, reinforcing the image of grace and delicacy. This was the century of courtships, engagements, and marriages, where appearances were everything. A woman's gloves were part of the ritual of femininity, soft, white, and often elbow length, designed to be modest yet alluring. They served to enhance the notion of an idealized woman, graceful, composed, and obedient. However, gloves were not merely symbols of femininity. They were also markers of control and power within society. For women of the upper classes, gloves were an essential part of their wardrobe, but they also served as tools of communication. At formal events, a woman's gloves could send subtle signals, whether she was available for courtship or had already committed herself to a suitor. The way gloves were worn, whether elegantly clasped or loosely draped over one's wrist, spoke volumes about a woman's relationship status, social position, and even her mood. It wasn't just about the materials or the fit. Gloves had become part of the larger ritual of societal performance. The gesture of removing one's gloves was equally symbolic, often performed when a woman was about to engage in an intimate conversation or during more private moments. The simple act of donning and removing gloves carried an unspoken language of propriety and decorum, marking boundaries between public and private life and speaking to a woman's role in society. In addition to their connection with femininity and status, gloves during this period also held a certain air of mystery and sophistication. As women's roles in society were still largely defined by expectations of subservience and modesty, gloves became a way for women to maintain a sense of control over their image. They could hide, reveal, or subtly manipulate their appearance, allowing them to participate in society's rituals while maintaining a level of modesty and intrigue. Gloves, in essence, became a woman's silent armor, a way to embody both softness and strength. As we moved into the early 20th century, gloves experienced a remarkable evolution. No longer just a symbol of aristocracy or modesty, gloves became a quintessential element of both high fashion and everyday life for women. Their significance reached new heights as they became indispensable to a woman's wardrobe, worn both for formal and casual occasions. The early 1900s were a time of transformation, both socially and stylistically, and gloves played an essential role in this shift. One of the defining features of gloves in this era was their remarkable diversity. They were no longer reserved solely for the upper class, but became accessible to women across various social strata. With the advent of mass production and more affordable materials, gloves were no longer an item only for the elite. Still, for those in high society, gloves remained a symbol of elegance and refinement, often crafted from the finest silks, satins, and leathers. In the first few decades of the century, gloves were seen as an essential accessory for women of all ages. Whether worn with an afternoon dress, a cocktail ensemble, or formal evening wear, they were always a sign of sophistication and social awareness. A woman without gloves at a formal event would have been an anomaly, as gloves were as crucial to an outfit as a hat or pearls. Fashion-forward women embraced gloves in a variety of lengths, colors, and textures, matching them to their outfits with meticulous care. In fact, gloves became an expression of personal style, subtly accentuating the rest of the outfit, from simple day gloves in soft beige to lavish evening gloves embellished with lace or embroidery. One of the most iconic features of this period was the long glove, reaching up to the elbow or even past it. These gloves were a hallmark of evening wear, often seen at grand events like galas, dances, and opera performances. The long glove became a symbol of evening sophistication, associated with both the elegance of the wearer and the formality of the occasion. This trend was so widespread that it's hard to imagine a high society event from this time period without a woman in elbow-length gloves gliding gracefully through the room. Perhaps no one represented the glamour and elegance of the early 20th century better than iconic figures like Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, and Jacqueline Kennedy. These women embodied the height of sophistication, and their love for gloves cemented the accessory's place in the public consciousness. Whether it was Hepburn's chic gloves in Breakfast at Tiffany's or Kennedy's elegant ensembles, gloves were woven into the fabric of mid-century femininity, enhancing their overall polished image. The 1950s in particular saw the glove as a symbol of both beauty and decorum, becoming synonymous with the dignified image of the modern woman. Gloves were also practical during this time. For women who still spent a considerable amount of time outdoors, Whether shopping, attending a garden party, or traveling, gloves served as protection against the elements. Light cotton or linen gloves were often worn in the summer to shield the hands from the sun, while warmer wool or leather gloves were a necessity during the colder months. In a time before hand lotions and sunscreens were as widely used, gloves were a woman's most reliable way to keep her hands soft, protected, and unblemished. The early 20th century also saw the rise of gloves as a symbol of social etiquette and politeness. At formal events, gloves were a visual cue of a woman's respect for the rules of propriety. The act of donning gloves was often part of a larger performance of elegance, a ritual of dressing that involved more than just the clothes, but also the accessories that completed the look. Even in less formal settings, gloves were an important part of a woman's presentation. Whether at afternoon tea or a simple shopping trip, a well-dressed woman was often seen wearing gloves as a subtle sign of refinement. These gloves were typically shorter than the evening variety, reaching just past the wrist, but they still carried the same air of grace and sophistication. A woman's gloves, in this sense, became an extension of her character, an unspoken language that communicated much about her identity, social standing, and taste. As the 20th century progressed, the once omnipresent accessory of gloves began to experience a gradual decline in popularity. This shift was influenced by several social, cultural, and practical changes, marking the end of an era where gloves were an essential part of a woman's wardrobe. By the mid-20th century, the glove had undergone a transformation, moving from a symbol of refinement and formality to a more occasional or specialized accessory. The decline in popularity can be attributed to a variety of factors, one of the most significant being the changing role of women in society. As women gained more freedom and independence, particularly following World War II, the demand for formal, restrictive garments began to wane. The post-war era brought about a cultural revolution, one that saw the rise of more relaxed and comfortable styles. Women began embracing more casual, functional clothing, and gloves, with their elaborate structures and social connotations, no longer fit into the everyday attire of the modern woman. Additionally, the emergence of ready-to-wear fashion and more practical daily wear in the latter half of the century made gloves seem increasingly unnecessary. The rise of synthetic fabrics, combined with a shift toward more casual dressing, further distanced gloves from their former high-status image. As society moved toward more informal ways of dressing, gloves fell out of favor for everyday use, with their place in daily life relegated mostly to special occasions or colder weather. By the 1960s and 1970s, gloves were mostly worn as a fashion statement or a nod to vintage elegance. They were no longer a must-have accessory for all occasions, but rather something to be worn for specific events or during certain seasons. While still an element of formal evening wear or certain professions, such as bridal fashion or luxury events, gloves were no longer a ubiquitous part of women's attire. However, despite this decline in popularity, gloves have never completely disappeared. In modern times, they have undergone a reinvention. Today, gloves are still worn, but their function and symbolism have evolved. In many ways, gloves have become a statement of style and sophistication, used to enhance outfits rather than define social status. They are often seen as a form of vintage or retro glamour, reappearing in collections inspired by the elegance of past decades. For example, in the world of high fashion, gloves make a statement on the runway, where designers incorporate them into their collections to evoke a sense of nostalgia, luxury, or timelessness. High-end fashion houses like Chanel, Dior, and Gucci have revived the glove as a key accessory, pairing it with both modern and classic looks, showcasing it as an accent rather than a necessity. These contemporary designs have transformed gloves from a symbol of formality to an expression of individuality and fashion-forward thinking. In everyday life, gloves are still essential, though their use has become more functional. For instance, gloves are commonly worn in colder climates, where they serve as practical accessories to keep hands warm and protected from the elements. Leather gloves, knit gloves, and touchscreen-compatible gloves have become staples for winter wardrobes, offering both practicality and style. For those who spend time outdoors, gloves remain an important garment, designed to protect hands during activities like driving, gardening, or cycling. But it is not just about warmth and practicality. gloves are now also used to express personal style in subtle ways. Fashion enthusiasts still turn to gloves to complete a sophisticated look, whether it's a chic pair of leather gloves in the winter or a statement piece at a special event. In formal events, like weddings or galas, gloves still find their place, often in the form of delicate lace or satin gloves, evoking a sense of timeless beauty and refinement. Even in the realm of pop culture, gloves have managed to maintain their allure. Icons like Lady Gaga, Rihanna, and Beyoncé have donned gloves in their performances and public appearances, using them as a tool to express bold fashion statements and individuality. Gloves have thus evolved from a symbol of high society and propriety to a modern accessory for those wishing to add a touch of old-world glamour or artistic flair to their look. Ultimately, while gloves may no longer serve the same societal functions they once did, they continue to exist in the modern era, albeit in a new, more diverse context. Whether as an accent in high fashion, a practical piece of winterwear, or a nod to vintage sophistication, gloves remain a part of the fashion landscape, holding on to a hint of the elegance and symbolism they carried through the centuries. Gloves, once a symbol of refinement and elegance, have evolved throughout history, transitioning from a necessary accessory to a statement of style. Despite their decline in popularity, they still hold a place in modern fashion, offering both practicality and sophistication. Whether used to complete a vintage-inspired look or keep hands warm in the winter, gloves continue to add a touch of timeless charm. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights on fashion history and timeless trends. Let us know in the comments how you style your gloves.